I'd like to discuss presentism and the price of presentism. Presentism is judging history and historical figures through today's experience and knowledge. And the conclusion, in many instances, that they should have known better because of what we know today. And in particular, I'd like to address moral presentism, judging the morals and ethics of historical figures and societies based on what we now know today and the experiences we've had to reach the state to which we've evolved morally. Historical figures who adhered to norms of their day that are now considered morally objectionable and deplorable must now be condemned under this ideology of moral presentism. And so our founding fathers, for instance, those who had slaves, including Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, must be condemned morally and their contributions erased from our collective consciousness and acknowledgement because of their transgressions based on today's standards. And my comments are not to justify slavery, which was an abomination. But the reality is, slavery is something that has existed in human civilization from the beginning up until recent times, and even today persists in the form of human trafficking and other societies. Slavery existed in ancient times, in ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and through medieval Europe. In fact, slave, the word slave, derives from Slav, S-L-A-V, being short for Slavic people of the Middle Ages who were slaves and who were white. And in fact, in America, so many people think of slavery as being uniquely American and limited to enslaving African Americans, when to the contrary, it's not true. All these other societies had slaves, and in fact, even Black slaves were owned by some Black Americans, and they were rounded up and sold into slavery by African Americans. By Africans, not by Americans. Again, this isn't to justify it. It is just a reality. But the reality is we evolve. However, by the standards of presentism, we make no allowance for people and societies to evolve. By the standards of presentism, nobody can stand up to scrutiny. Somebody like Muhammad Ali would be condemned. Muhammad Ali, in his youth, was very separatist in his belief. He believed that blacks and whites should certainly not date each other, but they shouldn't even live in the same neighborhoods. And yet, this man evolved, and he's, to me, one of my most respected and admired figures in history. He became one of the most recognizable and beloved ambassadors of goodwill in the world. And yet, by today's standards, he should be morally banished. The truth is, just like Muhammad Ali, we all learn and grow from our experiences. We learn from our mistakes. And so too does society as a whole. So too do governments. But moral presentism necessarily places us all under a microscope of evolving morality that none of us can withstand. And so it ultimately requires that each and all of us be banned into moral oblivion. But those of you who hate Israel, hate Jews, and protest against Jews and the right of Israel to exist, I submit to you, why wait for the future to be morally exiled? Why not now? If you believe the most persecuted people in human history, the Jews, are the only people not entitled to their own homeland, if you protest against Israel for human rights abuses, but against no other country, not Syria, not Iraq, not other Middle Eastern regimes that have committed true genocidal slaughters of Christians and Palestinians, if you haven't protested against despotic African regimes that have slaughtered hundreds of thousands, you haven't protested against China, nor anyone else. If you support the eradication of Jews from Israel, with chants of from the river to the sea, and worse, if you celebrated Hamas's intentional rape, torture, and slaughter of innocent celebrants at the music festival in Israel on October 7th, you not only will find yourself on the wrong side of history in the future, you are already there. And if your activities are discovered by potential employers and others, despite your having tried to hide your identity behind a keffiyeh or mask, don't complain when you are rejected for employment and other things. Because the rest of us have a right to free speech and to our beliefs also, and to reject yours. And accepting the ideology of presentism, we have a right to allow no room for you to say later on, I didn't know better.